Okay, let's get started. Our call today is on the effects of COVID on our environment, particularly with both buildings and cities. We have two very distinguished speakers. Uh, the Certainly COVID, there's a lot of controversy as to what the final impact of COVID will be. Certainly there are those who feel that once we have a vaccine, everything will go back to normal. And there are others that say, no, this is going to be around for a long time and our whole world will be changing. And our two speakers will be speaking about that, both from a micro point of view and a macro point of view. Micro dealing with dealing with buildings and infrastructure, and macro relating to cities. And speaking more on the micro side and somewhat the short-term side, we have Ethan Marchant. Ethan is a senior associate from the architectural firm Quinn Evans. He has a Master of Architecture as well as a Bachelor of Science in Architecture from the University of Maryland. He has designations from the U.S. Green Building Council as lead AP or accredited professional in building design and construction. Ethan is skilled at developing particularly some notable educational, cultural, and commercial projects. He likes to design in a simple and minimalist way. And as I said, he'll be focused on the micro and more short-term impacts. Then after him, we have Klaus Philipson, who is well known in the Baltimore architectural community, particularly having been 20 years as the chair of urban design committee for AIA in Baltimore. Klaus is president of his own architectural firm, Archplan Inc. He is a fellow of the American Institute of Architects. He writes a blog on urban issues, including Community Architect Daily, and he's also a founding board member of 1,000 Friends of Maryland. He received a degree in architecture from the University of Stuttgart in Germany. So with that, let me turn it over to Ethan Marchant.
Okay, thank you, Nate. And I need assistance in the ability to share my screen.
Oh yeah, okay. Oh, let's see. Do you have it now?
Let me try again. No, it says host disabled participant screen sharing.
Disabled, okay. Screen share. Oh, let's see. I don't know that I'm the host now with this new thing. I think it may be Nicole. Let me call her. Yeah. Can you enable screen sharing? Okay, well, okay.
It calls you the host, Nathan.
I'm the host?
Yes.
Okay, well, when I hit share screen, it says host disabled attendee screen sharing. It has me. Okay, now yeah, Nicole has allowed screen sharing.
There
Can
we
we?
go.
There we go. Okay, all right.
Yay.
Okay, so are you seeing my screen now?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
Excellent, excellent. We got past that part, so ready to roll. Hopefully, one of the long-term impacts of COVID is we all become much more adept at this digital interface that we have to deal with, and can get these happen. This is certainly not the first meeting where it's been delayed. So, so part one of this talk, I'm going to really focus on sort of three immediate case studies. Some are related to construction projects, other are speculative. We're really looking at three different sort of interconnected but albeit unique questions. The first case study is really a quick little story about our own office, Quinn Evans in Baltimore, that underwent a full gut renovation and redesign 12 months ago. We moved in almost 12 months ago to the day. We've only been fortunate to be there for 6 months, and we've all been remote. But we've been looking, deeply about how we can adapt this office space to allow for some of the new rules of engagement, during a pandemic and potentially long term. Some of the good takeaways are the flexible design that was implemented really allows the absorption of some of these strategies without tremendous impact. The building's located at the Mies van der Rohe designed 100 North Charles. It's a T-shaped building, a central core of the building surrounded by usable space. The design of this building really looked at, as you come off the elevator, which is located kind of dead center in the plan with the arrow pointing north, that we locate all large and communal collaborative meeting spaces to the north, and then open offices to the south in the three legs of the T, if you will. To further break that down and sort of taking urban design strategies and creating, streets and neighborhoods, each one of these legs of the T was designed centered around a cluster of enclosed office, meeting rooms, print and copy centers, with the open office desking chasing the perimeter windows, the floor to ceiling glass, as you walk around. There's a number of different circulation routes that we've looked at that adapt really well, as well as seating and meeting spaces. This is, for instance, one of the, a picture of one of those little clustered meeting spaces that's in the neighborhood itself, and you can see choices of circulation that's around, the wood-clad map that has a CNC routed map of Baltimore engraved in the facade of that box. But really a simple strategy that seems to be the most commonplace is clockwise movement around the core, and then being able, because of the breakdown of these clusters, to be able to peel off into small offshoots and really create distinct circulation patterns very easily, and adaptably handled in that passage, which allows any inconsistent interactions with people as you move around. So this plan really sort of lent itself quite well to that, and the counterclock or the clockwise motion seems to be a very common location or series of travel paths. You can see through this view, how those circulation paths really kind of embrace daylight at the end. And then leading into the discussion on the meeting rooms, our large boardroom that takes one column bay, roughly 20 feet by 18, 19 feet long, was set up to hold, 24 people. Now starts to look at how we adapt these rooms and make them work. So using recommended distancing, we look at those spaces and repurpose them for smaller rooms. The small rooms that were set up for 6 to 8 people go offline. And we use these big rooms now for smaller meetings, 6 people in a really big room. You feel like you're swimming in space, but yet that's necessary in the world we live in at the moment. The two larger spaces at the top left and the top right can be absorbed for larger meetings. But of particular instance on the top right is what we call our kitchen area and then the garage. The garage is the room on the top right, northeast corner, which is literally a room with a glass garage door that separates off from the lounge area of the kitchen, and can allow a meeting room, originally intended to be acoustically isolated for a large group, can now separate out into 2 smaller meeting rooms or be actually open up and allowed to have 12 people in one singular space. So this little move, intended with full flexibility, has really kind of proven itself to be a huge benefit as we look to host meetings that sometimes get upwards of that 8 or 10 mark, otherwise would not have been acceptable. And then real quick, just as far as where we place and how we look at placing people. Breaking down the neighborhood certainly helps the isolation. We've used open office space around the perimeter using the standard 6x6 module, which allows almost a 50% occupancy if we so chose to open back up to that occupancy. We are not enforcing this. We have a flexible policy where at least through the end of the calendar year, if not longer, people will have the option to come back through a series of phases or continue to work at home for needs of isolation, and or what is really important with our young population is parents of young children. So that works out really well, and the idea of breaking down these neighborhoods, if you will, into these smaller areas really helps kind of keep the number of people even sharing space and air really distributed in a fairly small area of the floor, just naturally through the way the space is laid out. So the second one, this is a project. I'm actually sitting in the construction trailer of this project as I speak. But this is a commercial corn shell project, an adaptive reuse project in Cambridge, Maryland. It's about 60,000 square feet. Where through this process of understanding the impact of coronavirus and the COVID disease, became something we started looking at mechanical units and what we can do to purify the air. This is used by the developer as a marketing technique to go after prospective tenants. The building has only 3 out of a number of tenants at the moment, and we've looked at a series of options of what could be done. From a lease plan, the building is speculatively carved out into the leaseholds that you see here. And mechanically wise, each one of these leaseholds is treated with a package rooftop unit, depending on the size of the unit, 1 or 2 units per leasehold. These are simple, high efficiency package units. And through this request, we did a research process through a list of different systems that can be used for air purification. Through that research, and one manufacturer we were looking with called Plasma Air, this incredibly insightful matrix was sent to us. And obviously with Plasma Air being the author, they click yes to every single box, and they're the greatest and the best that's out there, as you would expect from any manufacturer. But it's really helpful to see these different options and how they really address the issues. Not included in this matrix is the treatment of the particular coronavirus, and that testing is still ongoing on a number of systems and only proven on a few. But real quickly, I've gone through and highlighted in red, the best performing systems per category. And you can see that the Plasma Air, which is an ionization product, and the ultraviolet rise to the top with the most sort of check boxes. We in this project elected to use ultraviolet because of the package units that we're looking at, and the ability through the manufacturer to have those as an aftermarket product installed on the return air, before it's recycled through the system. Ultraviolet is probably one of the better, most tried and tested options, being used in healthcare for quite some time. And in the very recent past weeks or so, the particular manufacturer we're looking at received positive testing that the ultraviolet light does in fact, kill the coronavirus in their system. The ionization system comes at a slightly higher initial cost, but it is certainly a higher performing system as an add-on to the HVAC. We've talked to a couple of manufacturers, and they still do not have the confirmation on the coronavirus eradication in the air systems. So this was an interesting little, kind of branch that we went off on this project, and really kind of were able to educate ourselves and select a product that is running approximately in the $5,000 per rooftop unit range. So a fairly modest add per rooftop unit. When you rack them all up, it does add up to significant dollars. So as I said, this project is under construction and moving forward, a rendering of the repurposed and re-envisioned front of the building. So the final case study we'll look at was a design competition that Neighborhood Design Center and BDC hosted in the spring, of which our design was one of 10 shortlisted for publication in a guidebook. This is entirely speculative. The intent, was to work with BDC to implement some of these designs. This one was not able to be implemented based on a number of uncontrollable factors. But really the intent of this project was to look at a vacant lot and figure out a way to create space that can be used for collective making, gathering, performance, art, social activities. So physically distanced, socially connected, really sort of taking issue with the whole term that's become so dominant of social distancing, which is very negative, right? Physical distancing is important. Social connectivity is always, of utmost importance. So this looks really to simply grid out the site in a series of modules that takes a standard, this is a double row home size lot, but looking at, 30 to 45 people here, in a simple module that reinforces, a limit of people at a specific distance, and how that can really work to serve a series of different uses. Just to zoom up real close, you start to see the central core, the module that is the nucleus of the site as one of these, 12 foot by 11 foot, modules. Some of them would be on deck, some of them would be on grade. But at the center of that module is what we call the flip-flop tabletop, which is a transformable picnic table with a solar-powered light that sort of gives it its own little kind of idiosyncratic identity within the matrix of the others, and really looks at a reconfigurable tabletop that can allow this module, the central nucleus of the design, to be introverted and face towards the middle as a group of 6 people traditionally would sit at a tabletop, or to really flip around and allow that boundary to span across the module, still maintaining that 6-foot distance apart. And creating flexibility within an otherwise, quite rigid module. This was thought about as, something that could potentially travel and does not necessarily need to be, unique to an urban site, but could be something that gets implemented as a one-off basis, in a parking lot or in other empty lots somewhere else within the city. So we had a little bit of fun with this one and enjoyed participating. We're certainly honored to be one of the 10 selected firms. So that's the end of my my part one, and at this point, I will turn it over to Klaus.
Right. Good afternoon. Now I have to get this going. And so many of us feel on many days, I think, that everything is going wrong in recent times. I mean, COVID related and many other reasons. So this biblical verse does express our feelings too often, which is kind of the doom scenario. And when I think of COVID, I think of this picture that I got a few weeks ago when my grandchild, who is 4 years old, had her first day of preschool in San Diego, and her being confined in this little smiley face, but then at the same time having the flower of hope. And when you look very carefully at her eyes, a very kind of a lot of spunk in there. Then those are the components of hope, despair, and spunk that we need, and to address how and when we think about how it will affect cities in the long run. So we have these scenarios, you know, this is before COVID at the Inner Harbor, and then it was like last week how it looked there in spite of much nicer weather. It was all empty. And so I just have a bunch of quotes that kind of express the range of feelings that folks have about the future of cities. John Murphy, the former mayor of Pittsburgh, is always a big promoter of cities, and cities will succeed. They will always be centers of civilization, you know. And there's a picture in San Francisco before COVID, people dancing in the street. And but then Stephen Kahn, a professor of history, wrote in The Atlantic, the possible result of COVID for cities is nothing less than the reversal of the urban renaissance that began roughly a generation ago. So that would be bad, but we know that cities had highs and lows, and that it is not guaranteed that a high point continues. And so, you know, we are looking at this, that the boats are sitting empty and have posters about the healthcare heroes. And then there is the economic aspect. So the mayor of Cincinnati says, well, we are so broke, you know, that without federal help, we will not be able to sustain our city. And then, of course, the inherent dichotomy between what one has to do with social distancing versus what a city is actually there for, which is to create contact. So that is what was expressed in this article in the New Yorker. And so our public spaces are empty. This is again last week in Baltimore. And as I said, this is the dichotomy of social distancing what we feel right now. And I wrote an article in my blog about the future of cities and posted it on the urban design website that AIA National has. And Travis Price, a fellow of AIA, wrote back in his response that the cycle of architecture is so long and the investment cycle is so long that people that file a permit today don't really think of COVID, and that this is all a simple momentary panic expanded by the hunger to design something that is special. And so, you know, that's the other, that this is all hype, and that at the long run, cities will be just the same. And we will return to what we see here in Harbor East. And then, of course, another comment that I got on the same blog is that the overlaying this COVID crisis with the other crisis that we have, the climate crisis, as well as the social justice and equity crisis. And then that all hits us at the same time. And in a way, the solutions have to be packaged. Then there is the historic situation. So the bubonic plague that hit especially flourishing Italian cities in 1629-30 had consequences that those cities had to recover from over a 200-year period. But then there is the other 100-year-old pandemic, the Spanish flu, that coincided with the end of World War I, and cities basically came out of it roaring, and we had the roaring 20s, and at the end of the day, nobody spoke about long-term effects of social distancing or any of that. So what in all of these, here the roaring 20s in New York, what of all of these scenarios are correct? And the only way to really find out is to take some data into account. And so one way to look at data is that mobility data that Google provides every week or every month. And so nationally, the places that had the most reduction in being a destination under the mobility that Google measures with the iPhones that people carry or drive around was -9% for retail, and they lumped retail and recreation together, and then they blocked out groceries, which were 0%. Transit stations lost 24%, workplaces lost 19%, residential had a gain of 1%, and parks were the total winner of 106%, which is kind of jives with our own experience. And for Maryland, those numbers are even more accentuated. So in Maryland, this is too small to read here, but compared to the baseline right before COVID, the workplace reduction in Maryland was 42%. So I want to talk a little bit more about the, oops, gotta get this forward. What is happening? Okay. Next. Work, the workspace, and this is a picture from the film, The Apartment, which plays in 1959-60. So this is like this New York office, which is like the extreme case of the open plan office. And so that is not exactly as Ethan's wonderful picture showed, the office currently looks a little different. But nevertheless, 5.3% of people work from home in 2018, pre-COVID. So that is not like a super significant number. In some cities, it's as high as 8.1%. And generally, overall, about 60% of all work and jobs are currently considered requiring a physical presence. So they are not even candidates for working from home. And of those 40% that are potentially, suitable, only 25 to 64% are really good candidates for extended periods of working from home. And these bar graphs here show that some cities have more suitable work from home places, and Washington, being the center of paper pushers, is kind of the king of the pack here, with 64% of all office works seem to be suitable for office work from home. So we have this fact that in New York, one of the most bustling cities normally, we have only 10% of people return to work in their physical office after some period. I mean, in August, when they could have by regulation long returned, they have not. And so many of you know from your offices that they're still not letting people back in, or we're right now in this month when the offices start to open up again. Now, by comparison, in France, 84% were back to work in their offices, because I suppose that is because they have smaller apartments to live in, and then it's not as attractive to work from home. So the New York Times did an inquiry about what people think about working from home. And so 86% really liked it. And only 1 in 5 wanted to really go back to work once the offices would open up again. And then, of course, there was a difference between mothers and fathers, depending. Work from home when you had children was much harder on mothers because of the traditional division of roles. And Kittleson did a similar inquiry with 1,000. They asked commuters as well as they were mostly interested in the traffic impacts because they're a transportation firm, but they asked also employers. And they said 40% of office workers would never want to work at home. And other 14% on the other end said we want to do it all the time. And then the majority, 26 and 46%, said they would do it occasionally or frequently. So these would be fairly significant numbers, even if you make them work only on the basis of those 40% that are suitable. So for cities that are really defined by the office more than anything, it is a significant change, even if you get only 10 to 20% of office workers changing their behavior and would begin working from home. So we would have a value reduction. Also, the AIA had recently an online webinar where 2 economists estimated how much the office as an asset would lose in value. And the numbers that they came up with, 17% loss this year, and then maybe half of that, 8% or so next year, is really similar to the number of people that may actually at the end wind up staying at home in the longer run, and that would be translating into some kind of office vacancy. And so that value reduction sounds like maybe not as much when you think of how empty the offices currently stand, but then 17% reduction in an asset is also significant in itself. Then, of course, we don't really have the time today to talk about these other 60% of work that require physical presence. And they also would change when you have the rules of COVID. And then it would be interesting to look at how they would change in the long run, or whether they would change in the long run. But we didn't have time today, so I focused mostly on the office. And then I focus also on the other pieces that make a city. So we have work, live, and play, I guess, is how we usually express this. So one place where physical presence is needed is retail, at least when you work in retail. And for the shoppers, of course, we have this enormous drift towards online shopping now. So the malls stand empty. This is the downtown San Diego mall that stands empty even before COVID. And we have this enormous increase in online shopping. So what COVID really does in office as well as in retail, it does push trends that already existed. And that's kind of the currently a sort of tourism that COVID just makes everything faster and bigger that would have happened already. But then there are some other trends that are actually going the other direction. Like the office has shrunk in size in those that planned offices per person in recent decades always smaller because of the non-address workspaces and the ability to put everybody in spaces in a very flexible way. And now, possibly because of social distancing, the office space would grow again per person. So there are sometimes trends that push in the other direction. When we look at the long-term impacts of these situations, like here, in this case, restaurants, the outdoor, or the ability of restaurants and retail to kind of move to the outdoors, that is seasonal, of course, but also the impact of it in the long run and how likely this is to stick around depends on what duration of this temporary feature happens. And, you know, we all started out thinking we would have 3 months or so of COVID and then we would open up again. And now the general consensus seems to be that this is more like a whole year, or sometimes maybe some think it would be 1.5 years, because the vaccine will not from one day to another change things either. So these outdoor installations and these abilities to kind of move into spaces where social distancing is possible, but the core function of the business can still be executed, they become more and more permanent over such a long period. And so also become the behaviors. So one of the fields that I showed in the mobility report as benefiting from COVID in some way, if you want, is housing and residential construction. So there's very little in terms of value decrease, or very little in terms of decreased demand. It's more like the opposite. So the AIA did a survey just this month that showed that, of course, the home office is the king in the bar graphs there, as to how much more people now want a home office space. So the space demand for the homes increase. The whole focus is more on the home, because that's the space where we are now more often, whether that is for online entertainment, for online working, or for online shopping. And so that in turn has also a significant impact on the city, because when you have, this is just a quote that shows that even in Baltimore City, the sales prices in residential market have increased, and this August was a record month. So that shows that the city is not doomed when it comes to residential use. And so when you look at the long-term impact on downtown particularly, or on the parts of the city that most of us share, then a 10% loss or something in that neighborhood of office workers would have a large compounding effect, because there would be these empty office spaces, there would be fewer people in the streets, there would be fewer people shopping, there would be fewer people going to restaurants and so forth. So you get this compounding effect of it. And the solution has to be, and that is similar to a trend that we had already anyway for cities, is the residential component becomes more and more important. So we get the conversion of old factories, the old warehouses of old Class B and C office space into residential. And that's something that has already happened in Baltimore. And COVID will most certainly accelerate that. And then we need to also find new forms of retail that we haven't thought of before, but you know, food trucks seem to be actually quite adaptable for COVID situations, and stores that are more like an Apple store, where the goods are more like in a museum display, maybe another way of having retail organized in the future. So those are my thoughts. In conclusion, I would say there are challenges for the cities that we actually have to face. They are economic and they are also design. And so it's not going to be all the same and back to normal in whenever that vaccine is distributed enough that we can be safe. And with that, there's a little bit of time for discussion. Let's go back to Nathan.
Okay. Anyone have questions? Please speak up. Or maybe I'll start. Maybe this is for Klaus. What do you think the impact will be on public transportation?
Yeah, that is something I'm very involved with. Obviously, that is a hard nut to crack because people are currently staying away from public transportation in some cities as high as 90%. In Baltimore, it's actually interestingly only 55 to 60% because we have such a high proportion of people that are transit dependent and they have no other choice. And now MTA is going to cut service by 20% on their routes and on their service, which is really bad because it makes the portion of people that are dependent on transit really be stuck even more than they already are. So what Ethan talked about, like for example, the ultraviolet light can be used in public transportation HVAC systems as well, or in the air conditioning systems, and is effective and is already in use in Dallas, where they had this already installed after the last small pandemic, and they had kind of the foresight to put this in, and that seems to work. So there are ways to make it safe, and you know, I believe very firmly that a city cannot survive without valid, viable, good public transportation that's also used. There's no way that we can all drive around again endlessly.
Another question, maybe this is for Ethan or either of you actually. I understand that in New York, there are long queues to get onto elevators. Is there anything that can be done on designing buildings so you don't have so many people dependent upon going up an elevator at the same time and having to wait?
I think that's really a pinch point that is very difficult to deal with, you know, in high-rise buildings. That is probably the single densest place that we're used to. You know, I have seen some studies where occupants have been scheduled based on, you know, tenancy and or groupings of people on a delayed schedule to start work. But that really relies on, you know, participation of every occupant within the building. And that's just a really difficult one to figure out. Other than not building tall buildings, which in a city is a very poorly thought through design strategy.
Stuart Stamen has asked, can safer ventilation systems be installed in elevators?
Yeah, sure. The elevators are subject to the same ventilation that goes also into the other spaces. So what the ionization and the ultraviolet light can be used for elevators as well. But then, of course, the aerosols, I mean, even with ionization and ultraviolet light extermination of the virus in the vents, you still have the issue that you're pushing the air in, and then the aerosol plumes that are around the occupants, whether that's in the elevator or in the office space, get moved to the next person potentially before it goes back into return air. And so a lot would have to be changed also in the way how air circulates through offices, and that's not as easy to fix, because you would basically have to put the supply on the lower level and the exhaust on the upper levels, and that's the opposite of how it is done mostly.
So when we do elevators in glass hoistways, we'll oftentimes, well, every time we do an elevator in a glass hoistway, we'll have an air conditioning unit that actually rides up and down on top of the cab. And that could be a perfect candidate to purify the air. I think that, it's still a dense population, and, you look at a normal high-rise elevator, and a lot of buildings are mandating 2 people per elevator, which is the result of those queues. Even to densify beyond that, as Klaus says, the air that's in there, is still circulating and not being purified till it goes through that process. But certainly the glass elevator strategy could be used in a building core type elevator.
There are some buildings in Baltimore now that have the new elevator call system where you are pressing, or you're on a central panel put in which floor you want to go, and then a algorithm in a computer designates the cab for you. So you're not going in the cab and select your floor, but you select your floor in the lobby or in front of the elevators in the elevator lobby, and that optimizes the trips. And in the past, that has been mostly used in order to reduce cost by building fewer elevator shafts. But if you retrofit existing elevators with that system, you can actually also reduce crowding that way.
We've got a comment from Steve Walters. I should say that Stephen Walters is going to be our speaker at the next in October, and that's going to be on October 21st.
You have your 1 o'clock?
Stephen is the chief economist for the Maryland Public Policy Institute, and he's written a book, Boom Towns, Restoring the Urban American Dream. But Stephen, can you unmute yourself and give your comment? I'll read what he stated in the chat room. On food trucks, Baltimore has an ordinance prohibiting them within 300 feet of a restaurant selling anything similar. It's just upheld in a court case. Maybe it's time to rethink regulations that prevent adaptation. Do either of you speakers have a comment on that?
Well, it's a tricky thing because you don't want the food trucks to make it even harder for the brick and mortar restaurants. And under COVID, this is even more so the case. But currently, it's interesting that the downtown is so deserted that the usual food trucks that pull up at lunch are not there anymore either, even though they would be easier to operate under COVID. So I can understand both sides, but I think that ultimately, we do have to protect our bricks and mortar restaurants and cannot just park food trucks right in front of them.
Okay. Joe Nathanson would like some comments on the future of malls, which are already challenged by changing retail patterns.
Well, again, that is a trend that has been in the making for some years, and the malls that are defunct in the United States is in the hundreds. There are still successful malls, but they need to restructure and need to serve the modern demands. And that is not necessarily a COVID issue, because a mall would fundamentally not be so badly equipped to work for distancing, because it has a lot of big spaces, but that the malls probably won't come back, and that is just something that has to do with online shopping and different habits, and that we like the outdoors better now and not all this conserved inside artificial space.
Okay. Dr. Brian Sinclair asked, how do the homeless and disenfranchised populations factor into reconsidered post-pandemic city building, planning, design, and use?
Ethan, you wanna?
Sorry, I'm having a little technical challenge here. I don't really have a good answer for that. That's a really difficult challenge that we're faced with.
Well, goes into this whole bucket of equity issues, and what COVID has done is made the inequities all just much bigger. And if you're transportation challenged and you don't have your car as your own personal PPE, then you are forced to use transit, then you have more exposure. And when you have forced to do work in physical presence, then you have more exposure. If you are homeless, that's the extreme of that, then you are relegated to the streets essentially, or to shelters, and you are even more exposed. So this has made the need to find solutions for these inequities bigger. And of course, what's currently going on is that the expulsion or eviction from homes is currently stopped by federal, state, and local laws. But that is, of course, also not a long-term solution, because it leaves many small homeowners or landlords that are renting out to secure their retirement or whatever also vulnerable. But not that we have any answers here, obviously, but the challenge is obvious, that if we are not solving these equity issues and homeless issues and home insecurity and the enormous deficit in affordable homes, then cities will be doomed, because the portion of people that have fallen through the net and the grid are larger and larger.
Another question. I know, Klaus, you were talking about, and so I think you said an 18% loss in value of offices, and I think you had about that number of people that were working at home compared to before. But if offices are having social distancing, wouldn't that offset the fewer people coming in terms of the need for space?
Well, that could be. That just balances out. That at least for the time when we just need to have these distances. And there are, of course, a lot of questions of whether we have to count on the next pandemic and should build this into design into the future. My sense is that some of this will go away because people, that's directly relating to cost. And so the desire to find compact solutions will probably prevail in the end. So this office as a essentially obsolete way of working in this way, how you routinely go from 9 to 5 to the office space, and when you don't really have paper anymore and everything is online and you could access your documents anywhere, is a question that goes way beyond COVID, of course. And it has definitely two sides to it, because technically you wouldn't need to be in the office to do a lot of those functions, but then in the world where creative innovation and creativity is really the key to success, there is still this element of human interaction, which is hugely important for creativity and productivity. And so that balance will come out somewhere in the middle, I figure. There will be from home work, but there will also be physical presence work.
Okay.
I think a lot of office space has transitioned, particularly in government sectors, to kind of a hoteling scenario where people will be working from home for half a week or a couple of days a week, and sharing desks on the days that they're in. And I think that presents a particular issue, with sterilization, as that transient sort of population, really needs the security of a more dedicated space where they're not coming in and sitting where someone sat yesterday and potentially didn't, thoroughly disinfect. So that could be a challenge that comes out of that kind of, shared economy model.
Uh, this I think should be the final question. Mike Cordes asked, do you really believe apartment values will be negatively impacted by the virus? People all still need a place to live, so he doesn't understand that dynamic.
Well, the little box where I had the apartment devaluation estimates from those two AIA economists, or the one was Moody's and the other one was the AIA economist, included some devalue of apartments. I personally don't believe in this. I believe that the residential sector, generally apartments as well as homes, will increase just because there is an undersupply. And there's just not enough housing in the market, especially on the affordable side, but also overall. So I believe that that sector will actually, but I'm not an economist. So, but my personal belief is that that sector will weather this crisis much better than the others.
Okay. Well, that we're pretty much out of time, but maybe if either of you have any closing comments you want to make, please let us know. Klaus?
Well, I'm just hoping that our presentation was a little bit useful, but that it also leaves everybody with some sense of optimism that we can work this through and that there are solutions to these problems and that we need to work on them collectively. And they are not automatic. They require engagement.
Ethan, anything to add?
Nothing to add. Thank you for having us, and appreciate your time.
Okay. Well, thank you everyone for participating, and thank you particularly Ethan and Klaus for a very thought-provoking session. As I said, our next session will be Wednesday, October 21st with Stephen Walters. We also are now have Bill Cole speaking on Pimlico for our November session. So, and that should be on November 18th. So we, again, thank the speakers and hope all of you will join us for the upcoming presentations. Thank you.
Thank you.